Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team Podcast, your home of everything Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson, and I will be your host today for episode 17 of the Reserve Team Podcast. We have lots to talk about this week. It's going to be a mega episode. We're going to dive back into our power rankings. It's been a little while since we've had a look at these. Lots has unfolded over recent weeks. So we're going to take a look at the A-League and the W-League and rank the teams and see where they stand at the moment. And after that as well, we're going to dive into what I imagine is going to be an interesting discussion around everyone's favourite thing about football, VAR. Joining me on the podcast this week, we have Stephen Paletti. Hello, Stephen.
Bran, how are you?
Doing very well, thanks, mate. Thank you for jumping on the podcast. And as always, joining us as well, we have Sean Matheson. How are you, Sean?
I'm good, thanks, mate. After a week off last week, great to get the opportunity to talk football again with you boys, and also another great chance to rub in Melbourne City's win against Stephen's team, Sydney, last night. I just couldn't help myself but get the kid out today. I've learnt from watching you these past few weeks, Bran.
Fantastic, I love it. And thank you as well for acknowledging that we weren't here last week. Unfortunately, we were hampered by some technical difficulties, Sean. You were going through a move. You host our recording stuff, and of course, as part of moving, you had no internet. So therefore, recording became very, very difficult. Gave us a week off, but we are back and raring to go. And what we're going to do to start off with is we're going to dive into our power rankings. We're going to start with the A-League as well. And boys, I'm excited for this. This is going to be one hell of a discussion, I imagine. Well, definitely. Well, if we have a look there, Sean, I believe you have our previous power rankings up on the screen already. So if we have a look, there are already a couple of things that jump out. So we are going to update and we are going to adjust them. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from the bottom. And for those who didn't see our power rankings last time, the way it works is we sort of rank each team based on their current, how we rate them currently. So while wins, losses and draws are, of course, a factor, it's more of a reflection on who is the best team in the league at this moment. It factors in, performances, while results might not have gone one team's way, they might have shown something in those results that indicate they're better than their ladder position might suggest. And we're also going to factor in pre-season expectations as well. So with that sort of clarified, gentlemen, let's start off. We're going to start from the bottom, number 12. Now, I think this one might be possibly the easiest power ranking we're going to have through the course of the episode. I think the bottom of our power rankings for the A-League, number 12, it has to be the Melbourne Victory. Sean, what are your thoughts? Is there any way that the Victory can be anywhere other than the bottom?
The only way and the only argument I think you could make is that we're still at that weird point in the season where so many teams have played so many different amounts of games. And Victory are one of those sides in the group that kind of haven't played that many. And at the same time, we're probably going to say glowing things about Perth, even though they haven't played that many games and we don't know that much about them just from the 5 games that they've played. Comparatively, we're talking probably for the Newcastle Jets. We're going to use them as the comparison team because they were previously in 12th position. They've now played 9 games, which is the most in the division. It's a skewed balance because we're not judging Melbourne Victory against Newcastle Jets, both teams having played the same amount of matches. If Melbourne Victory turned around and won their next 3, similar to what the Jets have done over the last few weeks, maybe that discussion starts to come into it a little bit more. But on the basis of them only playing 5 games, I can't really recommend to anyone other than the Victory.
Well, the Victory, just quickly, I think they've played more than 5. I'm looking at the current table. I believe they've played 7 games. They've got 1 win, 1 draw, and 5 losses. Is that correct?
Yeah, so maybe I was reading the wrong column and just talking about 5 defeats instead of 5 games played. But same thing anyway.
Yeah, well, just quickly on the Victory because they are struggling. So they, in their entire history, they've never missed the finals in back-to-back seasons. Of course, they missed it last year. They're a very, very good chance by the looks of things at this stage to miss it this year. They've lost 5 games, 1 win, 1 draw. I believe this is their worst start to any A-League season. The nature of some of their defeats have been pretty horrendous as well. Stephen, are you in agreement that the Victory have to sort of sit down the bottom of this one?
Yeah, I don't think you can, and I'm going to try and be impartial here, but I don't think you can put them anywhere else. They've had terrible start to the season. The only win was against the Perth side, who have played who have only played the 5 games, and were, I think it was the middle of the game of that road trip, that 3-game road trip to Melbourne. It just doesn't something doesn't seem right at the Victory, and I'm pretty sure Brebner said he wasn't ready for the job, and if this starter's any indication, he's not ready. How long does Brebner have? Did the Victory board have enough faith in him to be the man of the future, or do they just turn around and try and get Kevin Muscat back, who was sacked in Belgium a couple of months ago? It just seems weird that Victory don't seem to have a plan of attack and just kind of coasting along.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Stephen. I'm done once again by my NVN connection. My apologies there. Well, we saw Tony Popovich is no longer with Xanthi as well, so maybe there's a reunion there in the future. But anyway, we're in consensus that the Victory are on the bottom, so we're happy with that. That's a good start for us, so we'll leave them there. Jumping up to number 11 now. This is an interesting one for me. Sean, who do you think should be number 11 on our rankings?
I would nominate Wellington, which is a long way to fall from 7th down to 11th. But the only reason I say that is when I compare the similar teams in this area, Newcastle Jets, Western Sydney, Perth, Western United, sides like that. I think each of those sides has had one good performance. Like Perth Glory had an excellent away win in that trip against Melbourne City where their game plan worked. They've also scored 5 against Adelaide. Western Sydney are obviously continuing to build up momentum. Newcastle have had some great results and performances again against Melbourne City, which is weird to bring up. I don't think we've seen that performance from Wellington yet. Arguably their last time out was their best performance of the season so far. But I think the fact that they're kind of like a bit of a train or a ship or whatever else, they're taking a little bit too long to pick up that momentum and start getting into top gear. Obviously, a whole bunch of challenges for them playing away from home this season, which is a big issue. But like if I had 100 Mexican people coming down and cheering me on every week, I guarantee I would be fired up each and every fixture. So yeah, I think Wellington sit in this category, but again, it's a bit harsh. It's just based on the performances that we've seen from them so far.
Well, I think I agree with you there. Wellington, their one win so far has come against the Central Coast Mariners, I believe. I don't know how they sort of pulled that one out of the bag, but they did go on to lose against the Mariners. Also, full disclosure, at time of recording, we are recording on Wednesday morning. The Wellington Phoenix and the Melbourne Victory will play tonight, so that'll be an interesting one as well. But I do agree for Wellington in at number 11. Stephen, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think you can argue anywhere else for them. Like they just don't seem to know what they're doing. Same as the Victory. They're very Jekyll and Hyde. You don't know where their good performances are. Like for me, their best performance of the season was that game against Sydney, and they lost. As the opening game, they lost to 2 absolute thunderbusted kicks from Neuenhoff and from Bratton, and that was their best performance. So take from that what you will. They didn't look too bad against the Mariners until the red card, and then it just kind of all fell apart from there. But that's generally what happens when teams get red cards, is it just falls off the rails. I still have them making the 6 because I think they'll find form once they kind of start gelling together a little bit more. Like I think they're going to go on a run towards the end of the season, but of course, that's going to come back to bite me on the ass.
Yeah, well, you've gone on camera and you said it, so we'll see how that plays out. But don't worry, I think we did our pre-season predictions earlier, and I think all of mine are in the bin, which is exactly where they belong. Yeah, I totally agree, gentlemen. I think Wellington coming in at number 11, they looked better against Western Sydney, but I think when you look at the teams ahead of them, it's hard to justify them being much higher on this list. So we'll chuck in Wellington at number 11. Taking a look at the number 10 slot, though, I have a nomination, and it might be slightly contentious, might be slightly harsh, so I'm interested to see what you think. My nomination for number 10 is Melbourne City, and the big part for this is pre-season expectations. Coming off last year, they finished second. They made their maiden grand final appearance, and then you look at this year, 3 wins and 4 losses, including a horror week in which they lost to Perth at home, lost to the Jets, and lost to the Mariners. Okay, the Mariners are flying, but Melbourne City were up 2-0 in that game. Having said that, they did just beat Sydney FC 3-2 last night. But for me, Melbourne City, based on where I thought they should be, which is right up the top of the table, we haven't seen that from them yet. I thought the first half last night was very good, but that was probably one of two good halves of football they've probably played all season. Sean, you're a fellow City fan. Am I being too harsh, or do you sort of agree here?
If we'd have recorded this 24 hours ago at the exact same time, I 100% would have agreed. I'd probably have even put them below Wellington, based on the fact that they'd played 3 straight defeats in a row against Adelaide, Newcastle and the Central Coast, and the manner of those defeats, the way they kind of rolled over. Central Coast 2-0 up, lost 3-2 in a game and scenario where they really, like a good team, would have seen out that one. That wouldn't have happened for a Sydney FC or someone of that ilk. And then again, Newcastle just blowing so many chances in that 1-0 defeat. That was a game where, you know, a good champion team would have found a goal. They would have found a scrappy way to win it. And, you know, that really wasn't counting against Melbourne City. Having said that, I thought the game last night was easily their best performance of the season so far against a very talented Sydney FC side. And I think, like, they largely made Sydney look bad, and they're not a bad team. They're a very good team. So for an hour, it was fantastic. Once Nikovic scored, the wheels started to come off a little bit, and there's that kind of like mental fortitude that's been a long-running issue in the Melbourne Heart era, and now, of course, a little bit in the Melbourne City era as well, where you just kind of felt that Sydney were going to snag something out of it. But I'm pretty sure they had one shot up until Nikovic's goal, and then they started to get a foothold in the game as they made subs and the game got a bit stretched. So I would say, based on that performance, Melbourne City are probably a bit higher than 10th, but I don't think too much higher. I'm not going to make a case for them to be in the top half. I just don't think 10th is necessarily reflective of... We have seen some good stuff from them. They were good against Western United. They were good against Sydney last night. They could have beat Newcastle if they had better finishing boots on that week. They could have beat Central Coast if they had finished all their chances, particularly in that first half. So it's not necessarily a case that they're playing badly. They're just not finishing off the stuff that they're making at the moment, and that had been their bigger concern. But look, I'm happy to defer to Stephen. He's the, not conscientious objector, but he's like the unbiased opinion that we probably have to defer to here as two City fans.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just quickly before we get to Stephen, if you don't think City should be 10th, who are you nominating? Who do you think should sit in that position then, Sean? And then we can defer to Stephen. I
would say Perth, which is tough on Perth. But again, they scored 5 goals.
Perth beat City.
Perth beat City, they did. But again, like, it was 3-1. They had, I think, 3 shots during that period. They got their game plan right, but again, City kind of rolled over them a little bit. They did score 5 against Adelaide as well. You have to give credit to that, but I just don't think they're not tearing teams apart, if that makes sense. They're not every week going out and like getting 15 opportunities. They're a very different side, Perth Glory, playing in Western Australia than they are travelling. And I think some of that's because of the youth in the squad, particularly in their fullback areas. And I think some of that's also because it is, you know, a new coaching setup. Richard Garcia hasn't done that long an internship as a coach, the way that, you know, like Corica did, Kisnorbo did, Warren Moon did at an NPL level. So I think their learning curve is still lower than perhaps Melbourne City's is. I think Melbourne City's come through those defeats and has learnt a lot about how they're going to be and is in a better position, whereas I think Perth is still kind of figuring out what isn't working for them, if that makes sense. And the big challenge with Perth as well is Daniel Steins has been excellent, Carlo Armiento has been excellent, but they'll probably both get dropped once Castro and Economides are both fully fit.
Okay, Stephen, let's go to you, mate. What do you think?
Okay, so I think we're going to have the same in terms of the 8, 9, and 10 spots here, but I want to nominate Adelaide United for 10th.
Oh,
I think that if you take out Friday's game against the Mariners, which we are going to get into in detail later in our VAR chat, they're 2-1-4 on the season. They don't look like they know how to play football. It just seems like they're showing up and just throwing stuff at the wall on any given day and see what sticks. Yeah, like they would have been on 7 points if it wasn't for the victory over the Mariners. Like they seem like, I think given the preseason expectations as well, like I think everyone expected them to be comfortably inside the 6 at this point. Given the recruitment, the way the team's been talked about, I don't know, they just seem like they're not there, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I think I might then agree that maybe Melbourne City should be a little bit higher. Maybe I've just got my pessimistic hat on with Melbourne City lately. Maybe those 3 losses in a week just rub me the wrong way. So, Sean, I'll come back to you then. So, Adelaide or Perth in the 10 slot?
I think Perth. Adelaide are good at home. They just can't travel. That's their issue. Like, I think What did you say, Stephen? I think they're 3-1-4. I think all 4 of those defeats are interstate, and I think their 3 wins and 1 draw are at Coopers. So, like, they're, again, like we said at the start of the season when we did all our season previews, a lot of these young coaches are going to learn lessons throughout the course of the season. We've seen it with Melbourne City, we've seen it with Adelaide, we're seeing it with Perth as well. We're arguing minutiae at this point, but look, I think Perth, again, probably harsh on Perth because they've only played 5 games. Of that subset, the 2 defeats that they've had, they weren't great performances in those 2 defeats. So I don't know. It's a challenge.
I mean, I'd be happy for Perth 9. I'd be happy for Perth 10, Adelaide 9 if we go that route. I don't. Because I think those are your 9 and 10 there. So I'd be happy to concede that Perth have been better than Adelaide.
Yeah, and I would argue that City then goes 8th. So like 8, 9, 10 is very evenly split, similar to what we did with these initial power rankings where we couldn't split Wellington and Western United in 7th and 8th. Mm-hmm. Like, I would say 8, 9, 10 is just a fraction of it that's in there. And based on, most recent history and bias, City's victory puts them 8th. I would say Adelaide's record at home puts them 9th, and Perth Glory, the fact they've only played 5 games and the fact that I don't think they've quite figured out what's working best for them, I'd say they go into 10th.
Okay, well, let's do that. Okay, I'm happy with that. I do agree, though. I think I would have had Perth a little bit higher personally. I think it is a little bit harsh on them. I think they might be this week's unlucky side, but 8, 9, 10, I'm happy with that. So that brings us up to number 7. Now, for me, I think the team that sits in number 7 has to this is tough. So the 2 nominations that I'm going to throw out are Western United and the Newcastle Jets for the number 7 slot. Now, the Jets currently sit in the top 6. They have played the equal most games in the competition so far. Of course, with the fixturing, everything is not even. It's a little bit all over the place there. They have 3 wins, 2 draws and 4 losses. For me, I'm not sold on the Newcastle Jets. I think the reason why they sit so high on the table is because they have the most games played. I think while they've been impressive in terms of some of their performances, I think a lot of that lies in we're expecting them to be absolutely rubbish, and they kind of aren't, where they're just sort of not very good, if that makes sense. So for me, I think the Newcastle Jets should sit in number 7. I think Western United, even though they're 10th on the table, I'd actually have them higher than the Jets. I think the way that they beat MacArthur on the weekend, we've not seen any performance like that from the Jets, where it was just sheer dominance and a very, very, very strong performance. So I'm going to say Newcastle number 7, Western United number 6. Stephen, what do you think?
Yeah, I have no objections to that. I hate giving Mark Rudan credit for anything. But yeah, I mean, Western United certainly don't deserve to be higher than this just because of where they sit on the ladder. And Newcastle, you could make the argument that, as you said, they're only where they are on the ladder because of how many games they've played. Yeah, I think having them at 7 and 6 in Newcastle 7, Western United 6, I don't think there's any argument to be made that should be reversed.
I'll argue it. Don't worry.
Right, here we go.
Western United in 7th, right? They're 2-2-2 from their 6 games played. They haven't at any point, their best performance is their most recent performance, and that was it 4-0 in the end?
4-1.
4-1. Thank you. That was arguably their best performance, and I think that's what puts them up into 7th above the likes of Melbourne City and Adelaide. I think if we're saying that Adelaide dropped from our previous ranking list from 2nd all the way down to 9th, then there's nothing that pushes Western United above Newcastle Jets. If we're going to remain consistent and kind of so the same way that we've just put Wellington down in 11th spot, having played 7 games, the same way that we've put Perth Glory in 10th because they've only played 5, I think we kind of have to do the same thing and say we don't know enough about this Western United side. To have 6 games played, 2 wins, 2 defeats, 2 draws, seems to me to be quite an erratic side that isn't building the momentum and form that we're supposed to be rewarding in something like a power ranking. Whereas Newcastle, while yes, they're not that great and their depth is probably the worst in the division, they are having a crack every week. And I don't think many people would have looked at 9 9 games in, Newcastle is going to have 3 wins and 2 draws to their name. I think a lot of us in our preseason predictions expected them to be much further down this list, just because of that lack of depth. Valentino Ewell, I think, is like equal second goal scorer in the division at the moment. No one saw that coming. Rami Najarine's probably a good shout for best young player of the season so far. Jack Duncan has been fantastic for them. I think there's a lot more going on at Newcastle in terms of the way that they're playing and the momentum they're putting together than what is currently at Western United, where it's still driven by how Diamante plays. It's still driven by if Berisha gets 2 tap-ins a game. I would argue Newcastle is above Western United purely based on we haven't seen that much out of Western United to say that they are a top 6 side. Their most recent performance is probably the one good result that they've had so far this season.
I'm going to come back at you with one counterpoint, and I'm going to see if I can change your mind here. When you look at the Jets, they're 3 wins. So they beat the Victory in Melbourne, okay, but the Victory at the bottom of the power rankings. They beat the Phoenix, who we have in the second bottom of our power rankings, and they beat Melbourne City. You know, full credit to them. Melbourne City, a very good side, but it was a game where Melbourne City... I thought they should have won. I thought they had enough goal-scoring chances to win that game. Having said that, so did the Jets now I think about it. But anyway, if we look at their wins, so Wellington and the Victory, who are both down the very bottom of our power rankings. Western United have beat Macarthur. Macarthur have been a bit up and down, but a good Macarthur side. And they also beat Perth. So their 2 wins are against teams that are a lot higher than Newcastle's. Does that sway you in any way, Sean?
No, I think you just kind of brought it up yourself. I think you played yourself because Western United didn't beat Melbourne Victory and they didn't beat Melbourne City. Newcastle did. So, if you're comparing their results, they haven't both played Wellington, I guess, is the tiebreaker there. Oh, look, I'll be completely honest. I don't care enough about this one. This is not my hill to die on, and there are more important rankings that are going to come in the next few weeks. So, if you guys 2-1 say that Western United's in 6th and Newcastle's in 7th, Newcastle Jets fans, never tear us apart, boys, but I tried for you. I think the best thing we can do is probably move on and try and get into our top 6 spots.
All right, very quickly, Stephen, what do you think? Make the decision for us. Who goes 6, who goes 7?
I think Sean's convinced me that Western United need to go into 7th. And yeah, Sean's convinced me. Western United 7th, Newcastle 6th.
All right, okay, cool. We'll take that. Taking a look at the number 5 position. This is where stuff starts to get a little bit tricky. My nomination here, I think it has to be the Western Sydney Wanderers. I think that's my number 5 for me. I think they've had some good performances. They've had some average performances. They look good in patches against Wellington, but then they also went behind. They did well to come back, but I don't think I've seen enough from Western United. I know they sit 4th on the table. They've got 3 wins, 4 draws. They've still only lost 1 game, but I just don't think they've been exciting enough. I think they're number 5 for me. Sorry, Stephen, what do you think?
They're very inconsistent, which seems weird when you look at 3, 4, and 1. They know how to get points from games. They just haven't looked comfortable for the most part. Their only defeat was that opening game to Macarthur, and they've just been able to grind out results otherwise. But they don't look comfortable on the field. Now that could be the depth issue, which supposedly has been solved by all the signings they've made. As Sean said a couple of weeks ago, the last time I was on the podcast, they look like they have a very Steven Ugarkovic-sized hole in the middle of the park that they're trying to fill, and they kind of have done that, but they've got a lot of attacking midfielders and strikers, so it's very hard to fill a hole in defense when you've literally got your squad stacked with depth up top. So I think I need to see a little bit more from the Wanderers this season. Yeah, I don't think you can put them anywhere but 5th here.
Sean, is this a consensus number 5 pick? What do you think?
I could make a case for Macarthur or Western Sydney going 5 and 4, but I'm happy to go with you boys on this one and just put Western Sydney 5th and Macarthur straight into 4th spot.
That was what I was going to lead into very nicely there. Whilst Western Sydney, I think, are a clear-cut 5th, I think Macarthur are slightly above them. It's hard to say. I feel like they've had worse performances than the Wanderers, but I think their upside that is higher, and I think they've shown that they're better. That their best is better than Western Sydney, if that makes sense. So I think Macarthur sit in number 4. That 4-1 defeat to Western United, I think that really, really hurts them. We've seen that they've sort of been a bit of a mixed bag. Stephen, are you happy with Macarthur at number 4?
Yeah, I think if they had a better performance against against Western United, I'd be making the case for them to be in the top two. But yeah, with them having such a just hapless performance, it's hard to put them anywhere but fourth. And the only reason you're putting them in fourth is because of where the other teams have fallen below them, that you can't make the case for any other team to be higher, even if MacArthur should be lower.
So just to close this off, and only so Western Sydney fans, both in the reserve team and in the chat, don't crack it, this is really comparing a team that I think struggles to find a rhythm but has enough individual quality to get themselves points in MacArthur, and a Western Sydney side that's very difficult to beat. Only one defeat so far this season, which is the fewest in the competition, and we're putting Western Sydney fifth. The challenge is, if Western Sydney go out and win their game in hand on MacArthur, I think that would automatically put them above them in this power ranking as well. The only thing that we're praising MacArthur for is the fact that they've played more games and therefore have more points to reference from. I don't think, and I'm happy to disagree with you on this one, Stephen, but I don't think MacArthur are like a top four side. I think they're one of the teams that we would look at this list and say they're going to slide once other teams get their shit together, like Western United, like Melbourne City, like Adelaide United. But yeah, again, fourth and fifth is fine for these two, but it's a bit harsh on Western Sydney given that they have proven, well, they're not necessarily going out and creating 100 chances each game. They're not dominating teams. They are difficult to break down, and they are definitely putting their defensive structures first.
Yeah, I think for me I think MacArthur just have more impressive victories, and I think that's what gets them over the edge for me. Like, okay, they also have worse defeats, but they beat Brisbane. Sorry, I've got a fly buzzing around me. They beat Brisbane. They beat Adelaide 4-0. Of course, that then balances out with a 4-1 defeat to MacArthur, and that win against Brisbane balances out with a 3-0 thumping to Sydney. But for me, I think we'll go Western Sydney 5. I think we'll go MacArthur 4. Again, we mentioned it before. I think these are two very difficult ones to split. And Sean, as you said, with one game in hand, Western Sydney, if they win, we could see them flip around in our next rankings. But I think we will move on to number 3. This is where stuff starts getting very, very tight. So the 3 remaining teams are Central Coast, Brisbane and Sydney. Sean, who do you think's coming in at number 3?
I think we've been very harsh on Adelaide. I'm just calling that out now before we lose some of the SA Red fan base that's been listening in along this point. So just acknowledging that. They're down in 9th. I've just realised they're better than City and United at the Western United at the moment. But top 3, I would have... Are we having this as like a holistic discussion for these 3 spots or just third position?
Yeah, let's do it holistically.
I would say 3 at the moment is Sydney, because I think they're not playing their best football. That's not to say that they won't, but I don't think they've solved the question that we've said about Sydney all season, which is where the goal's going to come from. I thought last night for 60 minutes, it was very easy to isolate Bobo in the shape and in the structure. And then once they made that adjustment to a bit more running in behind, they looked a little bit better, but that might have just been because they're more familiar with it based on the way that they played over the previous 6 games. So I would probably put Sydney and current form into 3rd position. I would put Brisbane in 2nd. Brisbane, again, at Redcliffe has been a fantastic move for them. They seem to handle the heat, the humidity much better than other sides can. And I would put the Mariners, even though they've slipped down a little bit and had a couple of defeats, I'd put them top because even though they haven't necessarily gotten full points in games, they are in every single match that they are playing at the moment. Like, everything is a battle. If not for some dodgy VAR discussions, which we'll talk about further later on in the podcast, they would have gotten 3 points against Adelaide on the balance of play in that match. So, yeah, I would say Central Coast are at the moment the toughest team to play, and that's why I'd be putting them top. And for the other 2, they're tough to play, but in certain scenarios and situations that work for them.
I agree. I think that Central Coast Mariners should be the top of our power rankings. I absolutely love that we get to say that. I've been totally proven wrong by them. I've just been sort of waiting each week for them to fall over and sort of like regress to the mean and, sort of have a couple of not tough losses, but sort of not be as far above expectations as they have been so far. And it just hasn't happened. You mentioned the Adelaide United game. I think they were extremely stiff in that one. I think they definitely should have come away with all 3 points. They're 4 points clear on top. More than they've got a game in hand over Brisbane, but they're more than 3 points clear of them. So I think they are certainly number 1 in our power rankings. I agree. Brisbane number 2. I think they've looked strong. I've actually just swallowed a fly. This is great live content. You know how I said, oh my goodness.
That's okay. I'll take over from here.
Stephen, go for it, mate.
Okay, so I think I agree. It's Sydney 3, Brisbane 2, Central Coast 1. I've got my own complaints and concerns about what's happening with Sydney that I might elaborate on later. I want to touch on Brisbane first. Yeah, they're handling it well at home. I think that home advantage, even though they're having sold out crowds, might disappear in the next couple of weeks because the Queensland Cup is set to resume, and so given that they will be sharing that stadium with the Redcliffe Dolphins, unless they can somehow find a way to manipulate the schedule so that only one team is playing on the ground at any given weekend, that ground is going to get torn up a little bit, and there might be other teams who will that advantage might disappear a little bit because other teams who are used to playing on lower quality, higher use surfaces might be able to navigate the pitch a little bit better if it starts to get torn up. The Central Coast have to be at 1 because they are absolutely amazing at the moment. They're 6-0-3 on the season. You know, they're doing everything right. I absolutely love watching them play. I think a strong Central Coast team is excellent for the league because you want to see Mariners Stadium rocking, and that's exactly what happens when they're going well. Like the crowds are slowly starting to come back, and that's just over the first 9 games. What happens if they make the finals? What happens, if they make the grand final? Do they win the whole thing? What's that going to do to crowd numbers next year? Are we going to get back to seeing 15,000 plus every single week in Gosford because the Mariners are doing well? And I guess you could say that's part of the fickleness of Australian sports fans is they all want to turn up when the team's winning, but when they're losing, you'd be hard pressed to find a jersey anywhere in Gosford. With Sydney, Sydney is supposed to have depth, right? That was their big talking point. They have depth. They've got a lot of good youth coming through. Neuenhoff, Wood, Ivanovic, Swivel. Marco Tilio couldn't get any game time, so he went to Melbourne City and he got 2 minutes off the bench last night, tops. Like, it just doesn't seem like Sydney know how to navigate any difficulty, probably because they've had it so easy for the last few seasons. And, Sydney can't help that they were better than everybody else for those seasons, but the second they face a little bit of adversity, they just don't seem like they know how to handle it. To go to that MacArthur game for a second, the 3-0 win, I was sitting there watching that game in the stands. For 45 minutes, my thoughts were, Sydney are going to blow this. They're a man up for 80 minutes and they're going to blow this because MacArthur just seemed like they knew how to break down Sydney even though they only had 10 men. I was waiting for MacArthur to score and then just grind out a 1-0 win. Now, that didn't happen, but, it showed a lot of fragility in that Sydney side. Bobo was supposed to be brought back in to be a depth piece. He played half an hour on Saturday night and then played 60 minutes last night. For a depth piece who's supposed to be complementing the strikers that were already there in Barbarouses, Bahaja, and Wood, and Swivel, it seems like he's come back in and has automatically turned into the best striking option we have, which doesn't... So,
sorry to interrupt you, Stephen. Isn't he on marquee wages?
No, he was, as far as I'm aware, he was signed on a regular contract.
Oh, okay.
Because there's no money for Sydney. They have money in the cap, but there's no money at Sydney at the moment because of COVID, which is why they had to send Lafondra to India because they could not afford his wages.
So I could be wrong, and I read it on Twitter, so it's probably not true at all. I heard he was on marquee wages, but it's not that high a wage. It was just to keep him out of the cap. The thing that I know you have to get these things off your chest as a Sydney FC fan. I think the fascinating thing about Sydney FC, and it came to the fore again in the game last night, they look like a much better team and a much more mobile team and a team causing other opposition defences issues when they've got Joel King, Callum Neuenhoff, Patrick Wood on the park. Those kind of 2 or 3 talented young players that they've got do make Sydney FC, I think, a lot more dynamic and a lot better a side. The other person that hasn't figured that out yet is Steve Corica, who continues to just use them off bench roles and whatever else. And yes, he sees the team in training, but no one could convince me over the last 4 or 5 Sydney FC games that Paulo Retro has played better than Calvin Neuenhoff has this season. No one could convince me that Bahaja or Barbarouses have had more active goal contributions than Patrick Wood has. And he's a very natural striker and a tap-in guy, but I think that's kind of what they need at the moment. The challenge is Sydney FC have been this established, wonderful team for so long that Corica's still trying to keep that group together and on the park rather than taking that next step and evolving. I think once Sydney FC start giving those kids, or those younger players, I should say, because I think they're like 21 and 20 and stuff. Once they start giving those younger players game time and they start starting matches, I think that will in turn see better performances, or at least more energetic performances out of Sydney FC, because they've got the individual quality in Nikovic. Again, they're a different side when he came on last night as we watched him. But yeah, I don't think it's all doom and gloom for Sydney. I think still be in third, having not really clicked into their top gear at all, is a huge credit to their footballing program.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. I have recovered since swallowing my fly, which was a traumatic experience. I said before, you saw me try to shoot it. I said there's a fly hanging around, and I've swallowed one live on the podcast. That's just terrible. I think we can agree that Sydney go in number 3. I think the main thing with Sydney is we've seen that they've had to struggle. It's not as easy for them to win games as it has been over previous years. Brisbane Roar, I think, sit at number 2, and the Central Coast Mariners, the mighty Central Coast Mariners, sit atop our reserve team power rankings. Very quickly, having a look at the list, gentlemen, Sean, are there any amendments that you think we need to make?
Yeah, I think Adelaide goes up to 7th and Western United and City go down. That's the only one for me, but only because I just think it's very harsh on Adelaide, given that they have got 3 wins this season, given that they've only got 4 defeats. Yes, there's some heavy ones in there. Potentially also, I'd flip Western Sydney and Macarthur, but again, that's just personal opinion. I don't really care that much about it, but that's the only one that strikes out at me. And just on Brisbane as well, like Brisbane, I think have had arguably the best draw so far with the amount of home games that they've played and the way that they haven't been as impacted by COVID restrictions. The stuff you mentioned around the pitch is going to be important as well, Stephen, but I also think as injuries and suspensions build up throughout a season, their depth may be a big differential. Just quickly from across the group, does anyone think the Mariners can do this for a whole season?
Well, I'm ready to be proven wrong. I didn't think they'd be able to do it for 9 weeks. And, each week they've sort of come out and they've put in a good performance and they've sort of shown that they can get the job done. I think against Adelaide, they played very well. The penalties and the VAR and stuff like that, I think was extremely unlucky. I think some of it was harsh. I think they deserved all 3 points there. Do I think they'll be able to keep it up for the whole season? No, I don't think they're just going to run the table and be on top for the rest of the year. I think that they will definitely make the finals now. I don't think they're going to fall off and drop out of the top 6, but I don't think they'll be able to hold on to that top spot, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. Stephen, we'll get your opinion on the Mariners, and then I also want to see if there's any amendments you think we need to make to the power rankings before we move on to the W League.
Yep. I think that the Mariners will probably start to fall away a little bit, probably around the 15-game mark, just because I think teams will start to work out how to handle Alec Qual. He's been their savior off the bench. Like, he's leading the Golden Boot. I'm 99% sure he's leading the Golden Boot. I could be wrong. And he's been coming off the bench. It's the exact spark they need. It's what Sydney are lacking, is they have that spark to come straight off the bench up at the Mariners. And the only reason I say that 15, 16 game mark is because I think that might be around the time that Stajic gives Qual a start. And then I think we'll see exactly what Qual's made of when he's having to play 60, 65 minutes. And maybe it'll show that he can only keep that momentum up for 35, 40 minutes as opposed to dealing with the pressure from the start of the game at this level. I still think they'll make the 6, just because I think they'll be able to grind out enough results towards the back end of the season, which is something they've struggled to do in recent years, to basically put them in that 4 spot. But again, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I think that, as I said before, a strong Central Coast is great for the league. If they go on and win and finish in first from here, fair play to them. I think they absolutely deserve it based on the opening 9 weeks. As far as amendments go, I don't have any issue. I think we've given plenty of reasons as to why teams should be where they are. Yeah, I don't want to make any changes on my end.
All right, Sean, I will give you one slight amendment and then I'll draw the line for another. I reckon Adelaide above Melbourne City, but I don't think they need to be above Western United. I think looking at some of their previous performances, they lost to Perth, they beat the Victory, who are at the bottom of the league, they lost to Brisbane, then lost to Perth, got pumped by Macarthur, and somehow got over the line against the Mariners. Tom Urich as well. I don't know what was up with him acting like a king after he scored a hat-trick on the weekend, 3 penalties, but that just griped me the wrong way. But I think Adelaide above Melbourne City, but no higher than that. Are you happy with that, Sean?
I'm happy to leave it the way it is. I think it's just awesome to put an asterisk next to where Adelaide is. Like, we went through the discussion, we went through our points at that particular time. It's just the way it sits right now. 9th, I think, is harsh given how poor some of the teams have been above them. But having said that, the big portion that like we kind of keep touching on or keep mentioning briefly is that a lot of different teams have played a lot of different amounts of games. Like if City wins their next 2 games, they'll go up into second spot above Brisbane and Sydney based on games played. They'll go above Macarthur. They'll go above Western Sydney. So if Perth wins their 4 games, they'll go top of the table by 3 points. So, like, because so many teams have played so many different amounts of games, and I know that's a massive generalisation. Perth isn't going to win their games. City's not going to win all their games. But, you know, like, until we get to that point where everyone's played 9, 10, 11 games, it does become very difficult to judge. So I'm fine to leave it the way that it is. I just think it's a big drop to go from 2nd down to 9th. I don't think Adelaide have been that terrible between, you know, last month when we last spoke about this, but I'm actually fine with it.
Okay, well, we'll leave it as it is. We'll stick with this for our 2nd edition of our Reserve Team A-League Power Rankings. Of course, if you've got any opinions, any agreements or disagreements, or make sure to let us know in the comments below or hit us up on Twitter where you think some teams should be ranked. Red Army, come at us. Gentlemen, we are going to move on right away to the W League Power Rankings now. We've got the graphic up there. Those are our previous rankings. As you can see, Sydney on the top, Canberra United 2nd. We're going to go through it in the same way, starting from the bottom. I think that we had Perth Glory on the bottom last time. I'm finding it hard to make a case that a team should be below Perth. There's one team that stands out. No future spoilers, but Sean, is there any? Can Perth be any higher than 9th?
No, and again, like they've only played 5 games comparatively with some other teams that have played 8 or 9. But in those 5 games, we've seen nothing that would suggest they're going to get points against anybody this season. So 1 draw and 4 defeats, and even that 1 draw was like a very backs to the wall job against Melbourne Victory in Perth. So yeah, I don't necessarily think they've shown anything that's going to make us think they're going to get off the bottom of the table, other than potentially some other sides also struggling to pick up points here, there, and everywhere. So yeah, I would agree that Perth sits at the bottom of this one.
Stephen, do you agree as well?
Yeah, I want to make the case that Melbourne City should be 9th, simply based on expectations coming into the season. But then you break down Perth, and as Sean said, it's 0, 1, and 4, you know, the singular point. And you look at their most recent game against Western Sydney, and they looked like the way they played, they were perfectly content to grind out a 0-0 draw. And then they conceded just before halftime, and they showed maybe 5 to 10 minutes in that second half where they looked like they were going to go for a result. And then it just seemed like they were perfectly content to just sit back and have a 1-0 loss. Like, for the last 10 to 15 minutes of that game, it seemed like all they did was pass around their defensive third and maybe got forward slightly on the counter-attack for all of 30 seconds. Like, they just, you know, that game very easily could have been 5-0, 6-0 to Western Sydney if they didn't keep hitting the woodwork. You know, when a result's in reach and you're only down by a goal, and you want to spend the last 10 minutes just passing around the defensive third, like, what does that say about your team as a whole? Like, at that point, that's when you need to be going for it, because you've been the worst team for 80-odd minutes, grind out a crappy result, get a point, come back next week, you know, just put that game behind you, and instead it's just like, let's just get out of here, let's get back to Perth, we don't want to be here.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement that Perth should be number 9. Stephen, I know you mentioned Melbourne City. They were the other team that I was tossing up for number 9. I think they are certainly number 8. I think that it would be near on impossible to put them any higher than that. You mentioned some of the preseason expectations. Yes, of course, they have lost a number of big players. The squad turnover is immense. They still have been able to attract a number of big players like Tegan Micah, Alex Chidiac, and why can't Sean help me out? Sorry,
Jenna McCormack.
Jenna McCormack, thank you. Thank you for that. On the tip of my tongue, maybe that was the fly on the tip of my tongue instead. I think Melbourne City sit number 8. Sean, do you agree?
I could kind of make a case for Newcastle, but this is just purely for speculation and to make sure that we're doing due diligence on the discussion. I would agree. I think City just sit 8th. The only thing I'd differentiate it is that City got pumped 6-0 by Melbourne Victory and Newcastle haven't been beaten that badly yet. I think if they played each other, and they do, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, I think Melbourne City would beat them. Melbourne City has a really good back five. If you kind of look at their defence and set it up the best way it can. I think Lee Davidson has been excellent for them at fullback, and wherever she's been glued in, Tegan Micah, I think, is a random shout for one of the best players in the division this season, which is crazy to think when speaking about a goalkeeper. But the reality is they don't have a midfield, they don't have a forward line, they don't really have an out-and-out striker. So they're really just giving the ball to Alex Chidiac and hoping something can be done with it as far as possession is concerned. But like a team with Sam Johnson and Jenna McCormack and Emma Checker and Tegan Allen and all these players should be doing better, and they're not. So, yeah, it's hard to argue against Melbourne City not being 8th. The only thing that would maybe save them is I think that they do have a better team than Newcastle.
Well, that leads us in nicely to number 7. I think it should be Melbourne City number 8. I think Newcastle sit at number 7. As you said, they do play each other in a couple of weeks. That'll sort of be a good indicator. I agree that I think Melbourne City are a better team than the Jets, but they just, the weight of expectation, everything that we expected from them, and just to be, I won't say disastrous, but it's not been a whole lot better than that. Stephen, are you happy with the Jets in 7, City 8, and of course Perth 9?
Yeah, I think Newcastle deserve the 7th spot because, as I said, and the same reason City deserve 8, it's based on preseason expectations. No one expected Newcastle to be making the top 4 at the start of the season, and everyone thought that City was going to be in that top 2, going back and forth with Sydney just because of the way they played the last 2 years, and they haven't turned up this year. I know there was a lot of turnover, but as you said, you bring in Chidiac, you have McCormick, you have Emma Checker, you have the Japanese international whose name I've forgotten. You do well with Tegan Micah, who is ruining my fantasy team at the moment. So it's one of those things that these two you just have to base on the preseason expectations.
Okay, so we'll leave those 3 teams where they are. Number 6, we had Western Sydney at number 6 last time. Did Western Sydney sit in that same spot there, Sean?
Yeah, I think so. They're not great, but they're not as bad as the 3 teams beneath them, if that makes sense. They're sitting in that position by weight of not being as terrible, not by way of being good, which is not the nicest thing to say, but I think even Western Sydney fans would say if they hadn't got that win a couple of weeks ago, they were really looking like having a long-term struggle. I don't think Dean Heffernan's really changed their style or their tactics or even their lineup frequently enough to try and get the best out of the team. So, yeah, I think Western Sydney clear set in 6th, and I think there's some distance between the bottom 4 and the top 5.
Happy with that, Stephen?
Yeah.
Easy. Let's move on to number 5. This is where I think things start getting a little bit tricky. I think 5, 4, 3, I think we need to talk about holistically here. We've got Canberra United, Adelaide United, and Melbourne Victory. Sean, who do you think, or what order do you think those 3 should go in terms of 6, 5, 4?
I think...
5, 4, 3.
Yeah, I think I would go with Melbourne Victory in 5th. Because the 6-0 thumping aside, they're very up and down, and some of that is just dependent on certain individual players and if they rock up on a particular day. They've got a tricky run of fixtures coming. They've got Melbourne Victory versus Canberra United will be huge, and they finish off the season with Sydney to come as well, who they haven't played yet. So I think that's going to be a big fixture for them. Having said that, they do also play Perth Glory twice and Western Sydney, where I'd assume they're going to get points. I'd put them in 5th for now because I don't think, as impressive as the 6-0 result looks on paper, I think consistently you get more out of Adelaide's front 2, and I think Canberra, while coming off the back of 2 defeats against Sydney FC and Melbourne Victory, they've been quite good this season. I think they play a better brand of football, and I do think the top 4 will be Sydney FC, Brisbane Roar, Canberra and Adelaide. I think Victory's got a big struggle. They can definitely do it, given the depth of their rosters and squads. I would put them 5th. at the moment. I would put Adelaide. Actually, I'd put Canberra in fourth based on the back of their most recent results, 2 defeats back to back. And I would put Adelaide up into third, based entirely on the strength of Cote Rojas. I think their front two, her and Fiona Wirtz, are arguably the best front two at the moment in the competition, watching them play. But yeah, again, this is splitting hairs. Like, this is the tiniest difference. There's not much between these three sides, I think, as it sits.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I think, the victory, they had that impressive 6-0 victory over Melbourne City earlier in the year. I think getting pumped by Brisbane 6-0, though, another really good team. And of course, Brisbane are very, very, very good. But that just sort of shows that against a contender, they still have lots of work to do. Canberra United, I think they've slipped a little bit. We saw them lose to Sydney and then lose to Adelaide as well. I think their match against the Victory this weekend is going to be huge. If the Victory do get up, we could see, I would think that those positions would flip. But for now, I think that's pretty accurate. Stephen, are you on board with that?
Yeah, I've got Victory in fifth. I want to put Adelaide in fourth and Canberra in third, just because I know Canberra have dropped their last two, but they ran into a Sydney side that was dominating everyone in their path, and Canberra didn't look bad in that game. They looked good probably right up until about the 60th minute, which is when all the goals started going in. And so I think it was just a little bit of a drop-off. It was a warmish day in Sydney there, given the 4:30 kickoff, so I don't think you can read too much into that. Melbourne Victory, even though they have won 3 on the trot, seem to know how to string results together. And I know I've just said they've won 3 on the trot, and so that would be a very good indication they can string some results together. But I don't know, it's just weird looking at the way they played in their results this season. This Sunday's game between Melbourne and Canberra is going to be massive. And if I wasn't going to the Sydney Macarthur game, I would absolutely be watching that game instead of the Sydney Macarthur game, just because of the implications it's going to have for the rest of the season. I do think, just based on the fact that Canberra do have a game in hand over Adelaide, I think, if they win on Sunday, they leapfrog Adelaide on the table. And I think that's absolutely where they deserve to be. So I've got Victory fifth, Adelaide fourth, and Canberra third.
I think I'm going to side with Sean on this one. I think the tiebreaker is going to be the fact that Adelaide United beat Canberra United in their last game. I think that's we are splitting hairs here, but I think that's got to give Adelaide the slight edge when we're talking about, these three teams, how close they are. The fact that Canberra lost to Adelaide, and so recently too, I think that gives them the edge, which of course brings us to the top 2 sides. And this is going to be an interesting discussion. We've got Brisbane Roar and Sydney FC. I'm going to nominate Brisbane Roar as the number 1 team in our power rankings. They've won 5 on the trot. We've really started to see them hit their stride, flex their muscles. Sydney FC had been on top all year. They hadn't lost a game. They came out against Brisbane and got absolutely pumped. We're talking about them before, how they might have benefited from playing those fellow New South Wales teams in, Newcastle and Western Sydney repeatedly. So that might have, led them to have a loftier ladder position than, might otherwise be the case. I think Brisbane are number 1. Sean, what do you think?
I do think Brisbane are number 1, but I think Sydney will probably win the league. I don't think there's clearly a top 2. These two sides, when they're playing well, are miles ahead of anybody else. Just as we said, Melbourne Victory's game this weekend against Canberra will probably decide the third and fourth positions. If Victory win that with their run home, I don't see them dropping enough points to have Adelaide or one of Adelaide or Canberra drop out. If Canberra win it, they go above Adelaide, and Victory's task becomes all that much more difficult because they're reliant on Adelaide to drop points at home, which is unlikely. Same one with this one. I think it's tough. I don't think Sydney have been that terrible throughout the course of the season. You remember the game before Brisbane Roar, they beat Canberra, who we've just gushed about, playing very good football, 4-0. So a very impressive performance on their end as well. I think I kind of agree that Brisbane go above, just by way of they've not been the worst team in a lot of games this season. They while yes, they've got 4 draws in their undefeated season, they have matched it, I think, in each of their individual opponents each time. I don't think there are any draws in there where they were arguably the second best side. So that's why I'd give them the edge. And then the recent head-to-head result is why I'd kind of put momentum and power, it is the power ranking, power in their kind of court a little bit more. I think it's a big result, but I do think Sydney FC will still finish top.
Stephen, I want to get your take on it. You're obviously the Sydney FC fan, so it'll be interesting, of course, to hear what you say. And Sean, I just want to agree as well that I think Sydney will probably finish on top, but I think that 4-0 result where Brisbane absolutely pumped Sydney just shows that in terms of power rankings, where, you know, how they stack up as a team. But Stephen, I want to hear what you think, mate.
So I was at that game on Valentine's Day, the 4-1 loss to Brisbane. For whatever reason, Sydney FC didn't show up. It was a tough game to watch as a Sydney fan. I mean, there was about 10 minutes in the first half where they had Princess Abini playing at left back, and I don't know why. It seemed incredibly weird. Like I ran into Chrissy and Rose at the game, and we broke that. And then we broke that down that first half, and it just none of us knew how to explain what we've just seen in that first half in front of us. And the only reason Sydney got on the score sheet was because the Brisbane goalkeeper stuffed up. I want to plug a piece I wrote for the reserve team, breaking down what at the time was Sydney FC's undefeated season and comparing it to the undefeated seasons of Melbourne City and Canberra United. It's a great read, so go check it out. I was actually very time sensitive for that one because I had a feeling that Sydney were going to have a poor performance, and it just so happened that 2 days later, I've got to put Brisbane at number 1. I think on the run of results, they haven't had a loss yet. In a couple of those drawn games they had to start the season, they absolutely dominated their opposition for me in a couple of those games. Like, the only thing they couldn't do was stick it in the back of the net. They never looked like they were going to lose any of those games. And, you know, it took taking on the victory and a 6-0 drubbing, you know, to get their season started, and they've been on the roll ever since. I think looking at those two teams finishing 1 and 2, I think we're looking at the grand final there. You know, it's going to be interesting to see because, as we mentioned, Brisbane are undefeated. They may not top the table, but we could be looking at the first undefeated team to not win the grand final.
Oh, interesting. And of course, we do have the possibility for an undefeated team not even finishing on top. That'd be quite a story as well. But I think we're going to end it there. We're going to end it reasonably on a strong consensus. Brisbane number 1 and Sydney FC number 2. Just to recap for those of our listeners who are listening on Spotify and cannot see the table, for the A-League, coming in at number 1 on our power rankings, we have the Central Coast Mariners. Number 2 are Brisbane Roar. Sydney number 3, Macarthur sit number 4. We have the Western Sydney Wanderers in 5th, Newcastle 6, Western United 7. Melbourne City occupy the 8th spot. Adelaide United are a hard luck 9. Perth Glory are a hard luck 10. Wellington Phoenix are a gloomy 11. And the Melbourne Victory are a diabolical number 12. Flipping over to the W League, Brisbane Roar sit atop of our W League power rankings this week. We have Sydney FC in at number 2, Adelaide 3, Canberra United round out the top 4. The Victory and Western Sydney Wanderers sit 5th and 6th, Newcastle 7, Melbourne City down in the dumps in number 8, and Perth Glory sit at number 9. Gentlemen, that does bring us to the end of our power ranking segment. I think we actually did fairly well on that one, got to get through it relatively quickly despite one of us swallowing a fly as well. Sean, we are going to jump into the Hall of Fame results, mate, and I believe you have those results there, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, so thank you, Bran. Jumping into our Hall of Fame results for last week, of course, we had 3 fantastic nominations. They were Kual's Red Card Wave, which was absolutely fantastic, and a brilliant nomination from Chris, our guest last week. Matt Simon's 200th speech, and just generally Matt Simon, the way that he sat down on Valentine's Day at that couple's table as a goal celebration is phenomenal. Costas Net Repair was the other one. In reverse order, Net Repair finished in third spot with 12.5% of the vote. Matt Simon's 200th speech finished in second with 25% of the results, and that of course means just another phenomenal moment from a player who's building a full catalogue of wonderful, wonderful meme-worthy portions of this league. Alul Kual, 62.5% of the vote. His wave, as Karen Stokes is getting sent off there, absolutely fantastic. And there's a brilliant GIF of this on Twitter as well. If you guys want to go and try and check that one out, search Kual wave and you'll find it pretty quickly. Jumping back into this week's nominations, though, gentlemen. Stephen, I'll give you the first opportunity here. What would you like to nominate as your Hall of Fame potential inductee for next week? Of course, this will be decided by fan vote. You can check that out on Twitter if you want to contribute yourself.
Yep, I always do, of course. I'm going to go back to the one I had the last time I was on, and I'm going to go with Teo Paliseri. I think that he got incredibly hard done by that week. I don't remember what beat Teo out, but I think it was... I think that might have... Was it the most Sislak tattoo for Jackson Irvine that beat him out that week? But yeah, I think Teo deserves a lot more respect than he got in that poll, and I absolutely want to see Teo get into the Hall of Fame.
All right, Branson, you know that really this is just a competition between you and I each and every week as to who's going to get inducted now that I am a 10-time inductee. How would you like to proceed? Do you want me to go first, or would you like the opportunity to nominate yours?
I'm going to go first because I'm going to win. I've got a big one, and he's going to get straight in the Hall of Fame. Sure. I don't care who you roll out, Sean. You're not going to beat this guy. I want to nominate a player. So, sorry, not a player. I've already stuffed it up. So we all know who Tim Cahill is, right? So scorer of bangers, Melbourne City FFA Cup winner. Everyone remembers him for his iconic celebration where, of course, he runs over the corner flag and gives it a bit of a boxing session. My nominee, though, is not Tim Cahill. It's not the corner flag. It is the ball kid who was at, I think it was the 2016 New Year's Eve 2-2 draw. It was between the Mariners and City. Tim Cahill scored, ran over to the corner flag. The ball kid inexplicably pulls the corner flag out of the ground and then backs away with it, pulls it away from Tim Cahill so he can't do his punching celebration on it. And I think that's great. You know, it's peak A-League. You love to see it. It involves the Mariners, which of course we love, who are probably the most meme-worthy. I don't know what it is about the Mariners and being involved in peak A-League moments, but this is just another one. Full credit to that ball kid. You know, what a move, doing that to arguably Australia's greatest ever footballer. But I think that ball kid and his corner flag removal, that's my nominee.
You definitely will only now nominate things relating to Central Coast Mariners because that's the only times that you win. Like Marvin and whatever else that you've nominated, that crazy game where the goal fell down. There's definitely a consistent pattern and theme appearing in your nominations. I'm going to go something slightly different, something a little bit more current to try and get it on the back. I did mention it briefly actually when we were talking about our power rankings, but I'm nominating the Mexican cheer squad that isn't necessarily supporting Wellington. They're just following Ulysses De Villa around the country at the moment or around regional New South Wales. They, watching the footage from them, they are contributing more than most active supports in and around different clubs. It will not shock me if next season every A-League club has a Mexican player of their own in an attempt to tap into this market. But yeah, I'm definitely nominating the Ulysses De Villa Mexican cheer squad as my nomination this week. And I think it's going to be an interesting one. Some good nominations. And I think they're all going to go toe to toe to find out the best. If you want to vote, of course, check out Reserve Team A or at Reserve Team AU over on Twitter. You can see the link to this episode. And then in the comments below that, you can also check out the poll to vote yourself. And if you've got nominations that you want to see represented in this show, let us know on Twitter and in the comments section below. But Bran, I'm going to hand back to you. We've got some important topics to discuss, so you can take the wheel and run us through our main topic for the week.
All right, thank you, Sean. So our big podcast discussion topic this week is everyone's favourite part of football. It is, of course, VAR. Sean, we've had this one in the bag as a discussion topic for a while now. VAR, it's nothing if not contentious. We've seen it applied in leagues around the world. We've seen it in Europe, in particular in the Premier League this year. It's caused a bunch of controversy, whether that's with penalty decisions or with offside calls. Of course, VAR has been a thing in the A-League for a number of seasons now. It's got a checkered past at best, culminating with the 2018 grand final, the Newcastle Melbourne victory incident then. It's had far more recent blights on the game, I think we can say, as recently as this weekend, of course, with the Adelaide United Central Coast Mariners game. There were 3 penalties awarded in that game, 2 of which were mighty contentious. I think Greg O'Rourke even came out afterwards and said that the official and the league got some of those decisions wrong. So VAR, boys, I mean, it's been a part of our game recently. It's had, a lot of ups and downs. What do we think on it? Stephen, I want to go to you first, mate. Are you pro VAR? Are you anti-VAR? Do you think it's time for the league to scrap it? Do we need to adjust it? Do we need to stick with it? Where do we go from here with VAR?
Okay, so I was pro VAR to start with. I could see the long-term benefits of VAR if it was used correctly. And I think that's been the biggest problem, is that it hasn't been used correctly. This is not just an Australian thing. This is a worldwide thing. I've softened my stance in the last few months just because of the way that it hasn't helped the way it's being used at the moment. Like we saw, I don't want to say flawlessly, but near flawlessly it worked in Russia in 2018. There was still one or two contentious decisions, and I think back to Australia, France, and that penalty. But other than that, it seemed almost flawless at the World Cup. I think it's been there's a lot of difference between the way VAR is used from federation to federation, country to country. It's for the longest time the Premier League took the approach of no, it's going to be the people in Stockton Park deciding the decision. We're not going to use the monitor. The only reason they had the monitor there was because it was a FIFA protocol to have the monitor there, but the ref had no say in it whatsoever. We talked about the 2018 grand final here, and you also look at the 2019 grand final, the offside decision in and around the 25th minute, I think it was, that saw a Sydney goal get wiped out, even though it was borderline at best and looked to be onside, and from there it led to a very dour 0-0 game that ended in a penalty shootout win for Sydney. And just the way it's been used this season, especially with the broadcaster cutting back its available angles at games, it just hasn't, there's been some decisions that have been made and it's okay, we don't have a good angle for this, particularly with offsides. We don't have an angle for this, so how can we be adjudicating on something if we don't even have an inline camera or close to inline, because of the way that the broadcaster has everything set up, because it wants to save money. The only league I've seen with a near flawless approach to VAR is the MLS, surprisingly. And I still know there's been a lot of criticisms in the MLS. As an LAFC fan, I get most of their games. I listen to them on the radio call because I absolutely love their commentator, Dave Denholm, and he is a staunch opponent of VAR and absolutely hates it and is not afraid to let you know about it. And I think that just shows a differing approach. I think even though it's working well, people are still against it. And I think you'd almost have to have it working in a way like it did in Russia for people to be happy with it. And I don't think that's possible, just because, as I've said, the way it differs from federation to federation, league to league, and the fact that there's no consistency across the board with it. Maybe you solve that by having one singular referee in the booth. So in Australia, that would be Chris Griffiths-Jones, and he literally sits there and does every single game. And that's his job. He's no longer going to be on the field. He has no other involvement in the FFA apart from literally sitting in the VAR booth, and that's it. And that might be the only way you get something resembling consistency. We've seen the NRL take a similar approach with their bunker system, where they don't want referees doing back-to-back games, and so you'll have them. So on a Saturday, for example, they have 3 back-to-back games. They'll have 3 different referees inside the booth, or the lead official per se, so that the referees aren't getting overexhausted inside the booth, because I can't imagine it would be easy sitting there watching 10 different screens for 6 hours straight and having to make decisions on almost every single call. So I don't quite know how you get it to a point where it's going to work here in Australia with the way the situation currently is. I thought that it would have been perfect last season if they had scrapped VAR for the resumption. And I'm a little bit disappointed they continued with it this year, especially since we all knew leading into the season that the broadcaster wanted out, and that we knew they were going to be cutting coverage. And we've seen exactly what's happened is they've cut coverage. We don't have angles, and the referees don't quite seem to know what they're doing with it.
Sean, what do you think, mate? Why doesn't VAR seem to work?
So I think it was interesting that Stephen brought up the World Cup where it was used effectively. And obviously 2018 is a long time in football and there's been a whole lot of other stuff. But I think we have a perfect storm of scenarios and situations that are creating additional challenges in the game, because we do see the same stuff. Like Bran, obviously, Fulham fan, you've seen EPL Twitter. It is ridiculous every week, the screenshots people pull out and show offsides and all that sort of stuff. The Leeds fans, the Bamford goal where his hand was offside but the rest of his body was behind the defender. We've seen players leaning in certain directions and that therefore puts them offside instead of onside, even though their feet are behind the player. Things like that, it's actually ruining the game and it's taking away from it. The other big killer, I think, as well, is the amount of time that it's taking here and there. I think what was applied during the World Cup was if there was a foul or an error that a referee had missed, they'd go back and have a look at it again. But then they ultimately had the opportunity to say, no, I got that right, that's fine, and play on the other way. Now, the way that the refereeing system has changed for the assistant referees or the VAR refs or video refs or whatever we're calling them is that they only point out clear and obvious errors. So if something isn't immediately interpreted, not just as being within the laws of the rules, but being something the referee has missed or the referee has seen but maybe not seen the right way because, the game moves a mile a minute and whatever else, that has also brought in challenges. I think where VAR worked was that it was still in the control of the person in the middle of the field and it was a supplementary assistance to them for them to go and view certain incidents and say, did I get this right? Or do I now need to go back? The challenge that we've got is that this is relying on technology, and as Stephen has already kind of alluded to, we aren't in a great broadcast position where the technology is there and readily available. The 2018 grand final, it failed mysteriously, and all of a sudden Newcastle Jets are robbed of a title. That should have been a scenario where there was an established rule set within Australia. Forget about international football for a moment, but within Australia, where if we don't have these minimum requirements to service this in a game, then we shouldn't be utilising it. And at the moment, the 3-camera structure for the A-League is insufficient to actually get relevant data or relevant viewpoints on certain decisions and whatever else, in addition to the challenges that come from what is, to be honest, some failures on behalf of the referees, as we saw this past week. If the W League doesn't have VAR because mostly single camera setups, if you can't get a venue that's got at least 5 camera setups, then there's no real point having it because it's not going to provide you with additional detail and context outside of what you've already seen or outside of what the referee's assistant might have seen. Positioning of cameras, using Amy Park as the example, they're actually always going to be on an angle to a lot of the offside decisions, a lot of the fouls, whatever else. The assistant referee in those situations or linesman, they're going to be better positioned than most people are anyway. So it doesn't really add any value to that other than give additional scrutiny and additional stuff for broadcasters to talk about or media to respond to or whatever else. If they were to say we're only going to have a VAR system in Australia if we can get 5 cameras guaranteed and work that into the next TV rights deal, fine, whatever, that's fine. If they can't get it for A-League and W League, then you might as well get rid of it altogether. We can't have top-tier competitions and sports with different rule sets and different guidelines around how video refereeing is going to be used. That's just not acceptable. In addition to that, Fox Sports has to take some responsibility for this. There was I like Adam Peacock a lot. This isn't a criticism of him, but he brought out an article placing the blame squarely at the feet of the IFAB, the international. I've got to actually read out what this abbreviation is. It's like the International Federation of something. They have basically changed rule sets where things like handballs, unnatural body positions is effectively anything that's not jumping up and down like this, which it wasn't in 2018. The one on the weekend, Kyle Rouse gives away a penalty. The ball hits his foot and then ricochets up into his hand. It's supposed to be the first point of contact. So that's a failure on behalf of the referees. The fascinating point is that this week, for the first time, Greg O'Rourke, head of leagues or whatever his actual title is now that the A-League's independent, came out and said, yes, the referees did get it wrong. And I think for a long time, that hasn't necessarily happened where referees have been held accountable to some of the decisions that they've made or the technology's been held accountable. And because we don't have that, because we don't have an open enough discourse about when mistakes are made and when decisions are incorrect, there's always that kind of carry on and that sympathy that it only ever affects your team negatively and it doesn't go the other way. It is going to be interesting to see how it plays out now for the rest of the season. Is the A-League, now it's independent, going to continue to provide feedback on referee performances? I think Jamie McLaren last week called out and said that they should have some sort of platform or forum where referees answer questions relating to their decisions. Whether we like those answers, whether we agree with them is a different scenario, but they're not really put into that situation. And they're not really put into that area where they need to justify it, or where, broadcasters need to say, why haven't we got 4 more angles of this? Or why don't we have a referee's input to say, is this the correct interpretation of the game? You can put so much as you want at the feet of like IFAB and FIFA and whoever else, but the reality is it's a bigger issue in Australia because of the lack of quality in terms of our broadcasting experience, and because I think a lack of exposure for our referees into how to manage the game. The game on the weekend, outside of even the VAR and penalty decisions, was very poorly refereed from a match management perspective by both the video official and the man in the stands, which is why we saw that rescinded red card for Kyle Rolls as well. He lost control of that game well before any of the penalty decisions had an impact on it at all.
Yeah, so a bunch of interesting points raised.
Sorry, Bran.
Oh, yeah,
can I cut you off for a second? Because I just want to go back to something that Sean said. Was you mentioned the Jamie McLaren interview that he did with the ABC, and I listened to that, and I completely agreed with him. The only time I recall seeing it in recent memory in the A-League was after the Sydney Derby at the SCG, where there were a couple of contentious VAR decisions, and we saw Chris Beath come out on Fox Sports after the game and actually explain what the reasoning was. And I know a lot of people disagreed with the reasoning, but we still got a reason, and that's more than what we've got out of anything else. And I don't want to put this squarely on the referees, because the referees are under a lot of pressure, and it's not entirely their fault. What I would like to see is, and I know this won't happen with the current broadcaster, is I'd like to see a referee in the commentary booth, or at least readily available to throw to, like what they do with the NFL. They always have a referee's analysis there. If you listen to Triple M's NRL coverage, they've usually got Bill Harrigan or someone similar who was refereed at the highest level, ready to throw to for an input to explain the decisions as they're happening. Since we don't have, for whatever reason, whether I think it's FIFA or it's either FIFA or IFAB, they refuse to let us have access to the live audio of the referee's decisions. This would be the next best thing to solve that, if, at least here in Australia, if the A-League is going to insist with VAR, if we can at least either have an ex-referee explain the decisions to the viewers, or at least come out after the game. Have the referee on pitch come out after the game and explain what the logic was, so that we can find out to drop some of this contentiousness. Because I am all for the referees being held accountable for their decisions, but I want it to be done respectfully, and I think this is the best way you can do it, in a respectful manner. Yes, you're going to disagree, but if you at least hear their side of the story, it's more than what we've got, and it might help ease the pain of some of these contentious decisions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and again, there are some interesting points that are raised there. For me, I think the biggest issue with VAR, and when it first came in, similar to you, Stephen, I was a big proponent for it. I was like, yep, fantastic. I found it frustrating prior to VAR, the fact that, we had errors being made, whether that's from offsides or penalty decisions or red cards. We had these errors being made, and we had the technology to be able to do something to resolve it, and we just hadn't done it. So I found that frustrating. So I thought that once VAR was introduced, on the surface, I was like, yep, great. We've got this ability now where we're utilizing all this technology where we should be able to get these decisions right. But the most frustrating thing for me is it just really hasn't worked. Some of these decisions, rather than clarifying grey areas, it just seems to have made grey areas even greyer. Like, it's difficult. And then, some of it comes down to, Sean, as you were saying, rule interpretations. What is the point of VAR? Is it to, overturn howlers, horrendous decisions? In which case, things like the Rolls one, where it wasn't necessarily clear and obvious that it came off his foot. You could argue that it wasn't, necessarily clear and obvious. Is that the role of VAR, where it steps back and goes, yep, we don't think that is a huge enough error to get involved with? And if that's the case, then that's just sort of adds to the frustration that I was hinting at, where it's just like, once again, we've got this technology that should be able to get these decisions right, but we're just not using it properly. But then, at the same time, we just get VAR chiming in on every decision, then we start going in the other direction in terms of fully automated officiating. So I've just found it so difficult. And I think, football is an imperfect game. And I think when you have VAR, it just sort of highlights some of those imperfections in referee decision-making. One of the things that I found most frustrating, Stephen, you mentioned the World Cup, Sean, you mentioned some of the leagues in Europe as well, is I don't understand why the referees aren't coming over to the sideline and looking at these things more. In particularly with the Adelaide Central Coast Mariners game, I think the referee only came over and had a look at one, and that was the one where it was a no penalty decision, and then he overturned it to a penalty. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the way that they interpreted in the game on Friday is that he awarded both penalties. Stephen Moore twice went down under little to no contact, first to Wle in the first half, and then he two arms entangled with Josh Nisbet, and he fell to the ground and was given a penalty. Neither one went to video review because the interpretation was from Kurt Ames, the video official, that the referee had made a decision based on what he saw, and it wasn't a clear and obvious error. The final one, the one that you're talking about, is the handball where they went to video and still got the decision wrong because it shouldn't have been given a handball because it hit his foot.
Right. Well, the more frustrating thing that I found with those first two ones was the fact that you have the VAR or the video assistant referee watching those replays, and he's the one who decides that it wasn't a clear and obvious error. So we're pausing for 3 minutes while someone who wasn't the referee looks at it. I think what needs to happen is the referee needs to go over and have a look far sooner, because if he's the one who's going over and having a look, the video camera will be, the video angle will be different to what he saw. So maybe it changes the interpretation of what he saw. Like from behind, the first foul where Togniak looked to kick Stephen Moore, from behind, he might go, yeah, he smashed him, he's kicked him in the foot, clear penalty. But then if he goes over and has a look at the screen, he might go, oh, actually, from that different angle, I can see that it's not quite what I thought it was. It's actually a lot softer. I'm going to overturn my decision. Where I think that it needs to be put on the referee to make that decision. And as you said earlier, Sean, stand by it, rather than the video assistant trying to judge whether or not the referee's got it right or wrong and that kind of thing. So that's my take. How do we fix it, Sean? What adjustments do we make here?
Yeah, I think the way that you just brought it up is good, because the referee can't send himself over to the screen. He has to be told by somebody else. He has to get it wrong or be interpreted to have misseen it. And that was the big problem with the Wle one. In the heat of a game, things happen at a mile a minute, and professional footballers, in Europe and even in the A-League, because we do make some good athletes, move incredibly quickly. There's no way without slowing it down to have figured out that Stephen Moore initiated that contact, and then once that contact came, that's when Stephen Moore came out. And Wle was there, but he was moving backwards away from possession to get himself out of the way of the challenge when that contact came. You wouldn't know that unless you went and watched it. And Kurt Ames, as the video referee, looked at that one and thought, okay, the referee has seen the contact and he's made the decision that it's worthy of a penalty, therefore it's not an error. It should have been a situation where the referee can blow and then go to the signal, feeding the microphone audio listeners, can go do the signal to go to the screen, go and have a look at it again, and then either make a decision on, is it a penalty or is it a free kick for a dive? And that's the challenge. And it was the same with the second one from Mork as well. That was 100% not a penalty. You could maybe make a case that the ball to hand was going into the net. I don't think it was. I think it was going over, but that's fine. The real challenge is that they don't have enough control from the centre circle to actually go and do that. The video assisted referee should be an additional aid for the central referee, not an interference point or not a point of conjecture with the existing referee. And I think that is in turn cranking up a lot of the pressure on referees as well. And because of that pressure, Kurt Ames, who is also a central referee in other games, knows that pressure's there, and more referees and video assistant referees are going to be unlikely to overrule the man in the middle. And that, I think, creates an additional challenge that isn't necessarily seen here. The fascinating part, Bran, and this is getting into EPL chat, which we don't want to do, is that most of the conversations in other parts of the world are relating to offsides, whereas in Australia, uniquely, we're talking about fouls and penalties and all that sort of stuff still, which shows that we just haven't gotten it right, or we don't have the broadcast capability to get those decisions 100% correct. And that's why we're having issues that don't happen in other countries.
Yeah, well, and just quickly going back to the referee having a look, I think the role that the VAR should have is, I don't think VAR should ever make decisions for the referee. I think the purpose of the VAR should be to get in his ear and say, hey, look, you might want to have another look at this, and say, look, here's a different angle, or we think you might have missed something. You come over and you have a look. I don't think it should be VAR saying, yep, we're happy with that decision. I think they should say, well, we're not sure. You come over have a look, referee, and then you make up your mind whether you're still happy with it there.
There was
Stephen,
apologies, Stephen. I'll throw you in a second. There was, so you might remember that Australia was one of the VAR test areas before it actually went live prior to that World Cup. One of the things that they'd suggested was that it wasn't going to be like an audio communication. You weren't going to talk to a person. You were just going to hear a noise that was going to tell you to go and review something. And that was if you wanted to have a look at it. So like they can bring stuff like that back into it where it isn't actually any two people talking or providing context to anything. It's just, here's this scenario, here's the decision. If you want to have a look, go have a look at the screen and we'll play you the footage that we think you need to look at. And that's it. There's no additional context.
Yeah, and I think it might be worth trying that where it's, anyway. Stephen, moving on to the next question here. Has VAR spoiled the game?
I don't think there's any other way to put it. It's... I think it goes back to the points I made earlier. It's just because you don't know what's going on. Like if you're at Hindmarsh on Friday night, for 6 to 9 minutes, you're sitting there whilst you've got a referee, literally doing this into his ear. And for those listening, I'm pushing the microphone into my ear, or the earpiece into my ear, trying to listen to what Kurt Ames is saying in the booth, and that's happened 3 separate times, and all there's nothing. You don't hear anything. You don't know anything. You don't know what they're looking for. For all we know, they're chatting about Sunday brunch. There's no information coming to the fans, and the fans are the lifeblood of the game. It's a lot easier on, for the fans who aren't on the ground, watching on TV where, at least the commentators can fill a little bit of time while this is happening. But if you're sitting at the ground, there's absolutely nothing there. It's like, well, okay, what are they looking at? Because sometimes you don't even see a replay on the screen at the ground. That's assuming that the ground has a screen available for fans to look at of the broadcast. Like sometimes you won't even see a replay there. So you have absolutely no idea what they're looking at. The decisions need to be made a lot quicker. If you're going to persist with it, and I look at the way some other sports do it, where so you look at cricket and they have the third umpire. The umpire has to have clear evidence. The third umpire has to have clear evidence to overrule it based on what's available. But that decision is communicated as it goes along the way. The classic, can you just rock and or roll that for me 20 times to determine whether there's been a nick on the bat. If you look at the way the NRL does it with their bunker, you hear the communication coming from inside the bunker as long as the technology is working. You hear at the ground and on the TV broadcast what the referees inside the bunker are going through. One credit I will give VAR is that it does do it a little bit better than some sports that have video review, but is that really a talking point? Like, hey, we do it better than some. Like, football is the most popular game in the world. We should be the leader at this. For some reason, we're not. Like, there is literally, maybe not so much in Australia, but worldwide, there is billions upon billions of dollars in this game. It should not be this hard to get it right, and yet for some reason it is.
Yeah, and I think in terms of ruining the game, the one thing that annoys me the most is not so much like the penalties, but it's more like whenever a goal's scored, you now sort of like you celebrate. You're like, yes, fantastic, my team scored. There's that thrill, that moment, the jubilation of that. But then you sort of had the concern of like, oh, hang on, is this going to get called back for, offside? Is it going to be called back off for an offside? Which, Sean, as you said, some of the ones in the Premier League, Patrick Bamford, his sleeve was offside, and the reason why his arm was offside was because he was pointing, saying, play the ball to me. The ball was played to him, and then he scored. And that's what ruled him offside. Stuff like that, where it's like when the ball goes back in the net, you just have a moment now of, oh, hang on, of self-doubt where you're going, is VAR going to rule this out? And it sort of takes away from that moment, that celebration of enjoying a goal. And I think that is, quite a big loss. But Sean, I'm going to throw it back to you one more time before we wrap up this discussion. We could talk about this for 5 hours, I reckon, but we are going to wrap it up fairly soon. What's the path forward here? Does VAR need to stay in the game, or are we better off with an imperfect game? Are we foolish to try to chase perfection for a system that simply cannot deliver it?
I don't think you need to chase perfection. I think you need to chase consistency. Like, I don't think it's fair and not a dig at you, Stephen, but I don't think it's fair to compare it to different sports because wicket in cricket, like there's still another 10 guys to come as far as batting is concerned. Individual decision in an NRL contest basically just decides that run of a play. We're talking about decisions and scenarios which could lead to a single goal in a single game, which is enough to win a game in football, which is why it is such a high pressure refereeing position. Like, I'm not trying to be overly critical of referees. Yes, they got it wrong. Yes, that referee should do some NPL fixtures just to show that he's kind of getting back in the rhythm and then come back up to the A-League. But it's not... The way it is right now, it's untenable because, as you've touched on, Bran, everybody who used to celebrate a goal now just kind of sits there like with bated breath waiting to find out if it's going to get taken away from them. And that's ruined some of the flow of the football. Shout out to Adelaide for using the Jeopardy music, but sitting there and watching 5 or 6 minutes of a guy watching a television screen to get a result in a football game isn't what makes the game great. So there's a lot of challenges, I think, that come into it with that. I do think it needs a review, and I think it needs a sizable review. If Australian football is going to go into an 8 or 9 month off season, which we are yet to see, we need to be sitting down and having a look at how can we deliver VAR as holistically as possible for the A-League and W League, and what standards are we going to adhere ourselves to in terms of quality of production and then also quality of referees. I don't think the current scenario is working. There's no... Fans aren't enjoying it, players aren't enjoying it, and referees are under more pressure than ever before because they have this additional resource that piles more pressure onto them. So I don't really see who's benefiting from it at this time, and I think it really needs a rethink as to how we're going to approach implementation for it.
I definitely agree. I think we can all agree that a rethink is needed, that the current system for a multitude of reasons isn't quite working. Hopefully, though, this weekend we have no VAR controversy. We had no drama, no talking points that arise from it. But gentlemen, that does bring us pretty much to the end of that VAR discussion. As I said, we could talk about it for hours and hours on end, but I think we'll call it there. What we'll do very, very quickly, though, before we wrap up the episode, a very quick preview. Looking at the games to come in the A-League and W League. At time of recording, Melbourne Victory and Wellington Phoenix are set to play tonight. On Friday, we have Perth Glory taking on the Brisbane Roar. On Saturday, the Western Sydney Wanderers taking on Adelaide United, and the Melbourne Victory taking on Western United as well. On Sunday, we've got the Newcastle Jets facing the Wellington Phoenix, and then Sydney FC taking on Macarthur. Taking a look at the W League as well, we have Western Sydney taking on Melbourne City and Perth Glory taking on Sydney on Thursday night. On Friday, the Newcastle Jets will face Adelaide United, and then on Sunday, Melbourne Victory against Canberra United. Some very tasty, very interesting fixtures in there as well. That is not the only football going on around the country this weekend as well. The NPL is starting up in Victoria and New South Wales. If you live in those days, make sure to get out and attend some games. I love it. Great. There's no VAR at the NPL as well either, so you don't have to worry about that. Get down to a local club, enjoy it, and support some grassroots football. Stephen, thank you once again, mate, for coming on the podcast. You mentioned before that you've got some articles up on the reserveteam.com.au. Where can people go to read some more of your stuff and get more of your content, mate?
They can pop over to my Twitter, which is @PolettiStephen, as you'll see on the bottom right corner of my little video feed there. Thank you, Sean, for that. Alternatively, you can check out Down Under Quidditch Media if you are interested in reading any of my thoughts and opinions on Quidditch in Australia. Otherwise, just hit me up on Twitter. I have links to both the Reserve Team and Down Under Quid Media in my bio, so check me out there.
Fantastic, and thanks once again, Stephen, for jumping on. Sean, where can people go to get more of your content, mate?
Just here on the channel and over on our Twitch channel. Links are in the description below. You can check out our Wednesday Night Football Manager streams. We're going to be doing some live weekend recap stuff starting this weekend, which hopefully you guys will be able to join us for at the inclusion of the A-League and W League fixtures. And yeah, on thereserveteam.com.au.
Fantastic. If anyone's after any more of my content as well, you can find me on Twitter @Branson_Gibson. I also have a podcast that I host with a mate committed to all things NPL Victoria, the semi-pro potty. So if you're after any news or discussions on the NPL Victoria, make sure to check that out. But we are the Reserve Team. Make sure to head to the reserveteam.com.au for access to all of our latest news and content on Australia and New Zealand football. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. If you enjoy our content, if there's anything as well that you want to hit us up about, make sure to do it. Leave a comment get engaged with us in the discussions on the power rankings, on VAR. We love to engage with our fans and we love talking all things football. But that does bring to an end another episode of The Reserve. Thank you very much for listening.